State of Tech, the European edition. I'm Samantha Lawrence.
And I'm Bob Russell. Today, Europe bets big on physical AI as investors chase robots and real-world intelligence. The EU prepares a landmark Quantum Act to supercharge commercialization. A €1 trillion tech exodus pushes Brussels toward a massive new deep tech fund. The EU AI Act's biggest compliance deadlines are now just months away. A London startup raises €64 million to reinvent travel booking with AI. And Brussels wants its own biometric testing platform to stop relying on American standards. Let's start with physical AI.
So we've all been obsessing over large language models for the past few years, right? ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, the whole text and image generation wave. But there's a growing sense that the next really big frontier is what people are calling physical AI. And Europe might actually have a head start here.
This is about AI systems that don't just generate text or images. They perceive the real world, they reason about it, and they physically act in it. Think advanced robotics, industrial automation, autonomous systems in factories and warehouses. And here's why Europe is interesting. Unlike the LLM race, which was pretty much dominated by a handful of American companies with massive compute budgets, physical AI plays to Europe's strengths: deep industrial heritage, incredible engineering talent, strong university research programs in robotics and control systems.
And investors are noticing. We're seeing real capital flowing into European startups working in this space. There was a massive seed round recently for a startup building what they call a world model, essentially an AI system that understands how the physical world works and can predict outcomes of actions. That's fundamental infrastructure for robotics.
The timing matters too. The big American tech giants have poured hundreds of billions into data centers for language models. But physical AI requires different expertise: precision engineering, sensor technology, manufacturing know-how. These are areas where European companies like Siemens, ABB, and dozens of smaller players have decades of accumulated knowledge.
The key question is whether Europe can actually capitalize this time. We've seen this movie before: strong research, weak commercialization. But the investor mood feels genuinely different now. There's a sense that this is an open race, and Europe doesn't have to play catch-up for once.
And if European venture capital continues stepping up, which the funding data suggests it is, this could be the cycle where Europe finally turns its engineering prowess into global market leadership. That would be a massive shift.
All right, next up, quantum. The European Union is getting ready to unveil something called the Quantum Act, expected in the second quarter of this year. And this is a pretty big deal, Bob.
It really is. So Europe actually has excellent quantum research. Some of the world's leading quantum physics labs are in Delft, Munich, Paris, Innsbruck. The problem has always been the same frustrating story: brilliant science that doesn't translate into commercial products and competitive companies. The US and China are way ahead on private investment. American companies like IBM, Google, and a string of well-funded startups have been hoovering up talent and racing toward practical quantum computers. China has been pouring state money into it. Europe? Strong papers, weak pipeline to market.
So the Quantum Act is supposed to fix that gap. It aims to remove regulatory barriers, attract more private investment, and specifically accelerate the journey from lab breakthrough to commercial product. It's modeled on the idea that you need a dedicated legislative framework, not just funding programs, but actual structural reforms.
And the stakes are enormous. Quantum computing has the potential to transform everything from drug discovery to materials science to cryptography. If Europe gets locked out of this technology, the strategic implications are serious. We're talking about long-term economic competitiveness and even national security, since quantum computers could eventually break current encryption standards.
The challenge is execution. Europe has launched ambitious tech initiatives before. Remember the European Chips Act? Results have been mixed. The question is whether the Quantum Act will come with enough teeth, enough funding, and enough speed to actually change the competitive dynamics before the window closes.
One thing working in Europe's favor: quantum is still early enough that the race isn't decided. Unlike semiconductors, where catching up means competing against entrenched players with decades of infrastructure, quantum is still largely pre-commercial. If Europe acts fast, there's a real window.
Quick interruption. If you listen to The State of Tech regularly, hit that like button and subscribe. That way you'll never miss an episode. Okay, moving on. This next story really puts a number on something we've been talking about for years. A new study from EQT and McKinsey found that European tech companies worth a combined 1.2 trillion euros have either listed on foreign stock exchanges or been bought by non-European companies over the past decade. 1.2 trillion. Let that sink in.
That's not a leak. That's a flood. And it explains so much about why Europe keeps struggling to build a self-sustaining tech ecosystem. You grow a company here, you educate the founders here, you fund the early stages here, and then, when it's time to scale, the company moves to New York or gets swallowed by an American acquirer. The value creation happens in Europe, but the value capture happens elsewhere.
And Brussels is responding. The EU is reportedly putting together a €5 billion fund called the Scale Europe Fund, specifically targeting quantum computing, AI, and other deep tech ventures. The goal is pretty straightforward. Give European companies a reason to stay European.
$5 billion sounds like a lot, but context matters. U.S. venture capital deploys hundreds of billions annually. $5 billion is a start, not a solution. The deeper issue is structural. Europe still lacks the deep capital markets, the large pension fund allocations to venture capital, and the unified regulatory environment that makes it easy to scale a company across 27 different member states.
That said, you have to start somewhere, and the fact that there's now hard data quantifying the exodus, 1.2 trillion euros, gives policymakers ammunition. It's much harder to ignore a problem when McKinsey puts a number on it.
The real test will be whether this fund comes with the right conditions. If it's just money, without fixing the underlying ecosystem problems, fragmented markets, complex regulations, risk-averse investors, it'll be a Band-Aid on a broken leg. Europe needs capital and structural reform. Both. Let's talk about the EU AI Act, because the clock is ticking very loudly now. Most of the remaining rules become applicable on August 2nd, 2026. That's about 4 months away. And there's a lot that kicks in.
The big one is transparency. Companies deploying AI systems will need to clearly label AI-generated content. If a chatbot is talking to you, you need to know it's a chatbot. If an image was generated by AI, that needs to be disclosed. The second draft of the Code of Practice on marking and labeling came out earlier this month, so the frameworks are taking shape.
And there's an interesting requirement that every EU member state must have at least one operational AI sandbox by August. These are controlled environments where companies can test innovative AI applications under regulatory supervision. It's Europe trying to balance innovation with safety, giving companies a space to experiment without the full weight of compliance from day one.
The question a lot of companies are asking is, are we ready? And honestly, for many the answer is probably no. The AI Act is the world's first comprehensive AI legal framework. There's no playbook. Companies are having to figure out risk classifications, documentation requirements, and transparency obligations in real time.
Smaller companies especially. Big tech firms have entire compliance departments and legal teams dedicated to this. A 50-person AI startup in Berlin or Barcelona, they're scrambling. And the penalties for non-compliance are serious, up to 35 million euros or 7% of global revenue.
So this is the moment where the rubber meets the road. The AI Act was debated and celebrated and criticized in theory for years. Now it's becoming operational reality, and the next few months will show whether it achieves the balance everyone hopes for. Protecting citizens without strangling innovation.
Also today, a London-based startup called Vuelo just raised 64 million euros in seed funding. Seed funding! That's an eye-popping number for a company at this stage.
It is, though we should break that number down. About 7 million was equity funding, led by backed VC and Play Ventures. The remaining 57 million is debt financing from Vuelo Credit, so the equity raise is more modest, but still substantial for a seed round. The debt component suggests they need significant working capital, which makes sense for a travel business that's essentially lending money and processing transactions.
What Vuelo is building is what they call an AI-native travel platform. The idea is you interact with one intelligent interface that handles everything: discovering destinations, booking flights and hotels, arranging financing for the trip, even planning your itinerary. Instead of bouncing between 10 different websites and apps, you have a single AI-powered experience.
And this is part of a broader trend we're seeing. AI not just as a feature bolted onto existing products, but as the fundamental architecture of entirely new services. Vuelo isn't adding a chatbot to a traditional booking engine. They're building the whole thing around AI from the ground up.
The European angle here is interesting. London continues to punch above its weight in fintech and travel tech despite Brexit uncertainties. This kind of funding round shows that European startups can attract serious capital for AI-driven consumer products. It's not all enterprise software and industrial automation.
The travel industry is ripe for this kind of disruption too. Anyone who spent hours comparing flights across multiple sites, then separately searching hotels, then trying to figure out ground transportation, you know the pain. If AI can genuinely simplify that into a single, seamless experience, there's enormous consumer demand waiting. Let's wrap up with our last story. The EU Innovation Hub for Internal Security has published a policy brief calling for Europe to build its own independent platform for testing and evaluating biometric technologies. Right now, much of the world, including Europe, relies heavily on standards from NIST, the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology.
And the argument is pretty straightforward. If you're depending on another country's institution to set the benchmarks and evaluate your technology, you're inherently at a disadvantage. You're a rule taker, not a rule maker. European companies developing facial recognition, fingerprint scanning, or other biometric systems have to conform to American testing standards, which may not reflect European priorities or use cases.
This fits into the broader tech sovereignty push we've been tracking. Just like the Quantum Act and the Scale Europe Fund, this is about Europe controlling its own technological destiny. Biometrics is particularly sensitive because it touches on security, border control, law enforcement, areas where strategic autonomy really matters.
There's also a practical commercial angle. If European biometric companies are evaluated against standards set primarily with the American market in mind, they might be optimized for the wrong things. An independent European platform could set benchmarks that align with European regulations, especially the AI Act, which has specific provisions around biometric systems. That could actually give European companies a competitive edge globally by demonstrating compliance with the world's strictest standards.
The challenge, as always, is building something credible. NIST has decades of reputation and expertise. You can't just spin up an equivalent overnight. It requires sustained investment, top-tier talent, and buy-in from industry. But the policy brief makes a compelling case that the cost of not doing it is greater than the cost of doing it.
And with biometric technology becoming ever more pervasive, airports, banking, smartphones, public security, the stakes only go up from here.
All right, that's our show. Today we covered Europe's big bet on physical AI, the upcoming EU Quantum Act, a €1 trillion tech exodus and the new fund to fight it, the AI Act's looming compliance deadlines, Vuelo's massive seed round for AI travel, and the push for an independent European biometrics platform.
Want to know more or react? Visit stateoftech.eu or email us at info@doorzetters.net. State of Tech, the tech world in 15 minutes.